All right, how you doing? I'm Eric Odell-Hein. I'm the teaching pastor at the Summit, the president of Columbia Evangelical Seminary, and I get to share with you today one of my favorite topics in the world. It's a little bit different because we're going to talk about, as you can see from the screen, we're going to talk about myths and symbols and rituals and things like that, and that's kind of a funny place for Christianity to go. I pace, by the way, when I talk. I don't want to trip over the chair. I'm a talking pacer, so I'm going to clear some space. But we're going to talk about these things that may seem a little bit unusual to some Christians. We're talking about all of these mythical things that happen. And I want to lay some groundwork first before we get started, because I know that there's maybe some nervousness or some risk when we talk about religious symbolism or mythology. First of all, when we use the term myth or symbol, it doesn't necessarily mean we're talking about something that's not true. There are lots of creation myths, there are lots of religious symbols. Some of them are true, some of them aren't. So if you hear me refer to like the biblical myth of creation, that's simply referring to the creation story. That doesn't imply that it's not true, it just means it uses a mythological structure. Also, nothing in this talk should be construed as challenging the inerrancy of inspired scripture. I take a very conservative view on the inspiration and inerrancy of scripture, and nothing changes that. So when we talk about a symbol, we're not necessarily saying that something that's symbolic. Is everyone hearing the echo, or is that just me? That's distracting. Okay, we're not necessarily. There's something wrong with me. When we talk about something that's symbolic, that doesn't mean it's not also literally true. To jump ahead, we talk about the tree of life in the Garden of Eden. That is full of ancient religious symbolism, absolutely overflowing with symbolism. But just because we call it a symbol doesn't mean there wasn't actually a tree of life in the garden. So I want to set some of that groundwork. But something that's happened in attacks on Christianity is people look at Christianity from the outside and they say, you know what, Christianity is just a collection of old pagan myths. It's completely borrowed from earlier religions, the Babylonians, the Egyptians. It's borrowed from the Proto-Canaanite religions in the area, and it's not really its own faith. It's just something that evolved out of other mythologies and legends. They talk about the creation story was lifted straight out of Mesopotamia. The flood story comes from the Assyrian epic of Atrahasis, or the epic of Gilgamesh has a flood story as well. They talk about even the divinity and the sacrifice of Christ is just following an old demigod hero model. And there's a lot of attacks that come out against Christianity that to a large extent, most Christians aren't equipped to be able to answer that. At least not intelligently, because it's kind of a funky space to get into. And there's a lot of misunderstanding, and popular culture doesn't help with that. I think that we were just talking, Randy and I, about the Da Vinci Code. And of course, a popular book made into popular movies, and the lead guy in that is a symbologist who understands symbols, and as you go through the book or the movie, it ends up in the worst stinking heresy you can find. Absolutely evil stuff. But how are Christians equipped to actually talk about symbology or mythology or ancient religion and rituals, and whether or not Christianity was lifted from that or borrowed from that, or if it stands on its own as its own ancient religion? Because if you follow the biblical tale, we know we have a common origin back in the ancient Middle East. That's where all of us came from. That's where all the cultures came from. That's where all of our symbols came from. And that's going to help inform how we move forward. So we're going to talk a little bit. There's all sorts of, I forgot to click through slides. I'm so excited to talk. And so we're going to talk a little bit about all the sorts of different symbols. And what's interesting is what we're going to do is we're going to look not at the specific particulars of each symbol, but we're going to look at the underlying religious patterns of each symbol. In other words, when we talk about standing stones or sacred trees, yes, they might have been used slightly differently in the Celtic British Isles, from the plains of Asia down to the deserts of Africa, they all use standing stones, and maybe they were used a little bit differently in each culture, but regardless of whatever ancient religion there is in the world, they all have the exact same underlying patterns for stones, for trees, for mountains, for temples. They all participate in the same subconscious religious reality in terms of what it's communicating, and that's what we're going to dive into and study today so that we understand the basic concepts behind religious symbolism, and then we can evaluate where does Christianity fit in with that. Does it stand on its own? Was it borrowed? Was it lifted? Maybe it's the origin of some of these symbols. We're going to find out. Okay? The first thing we have to do is talk about the structure of reality. And everything I'm talking about in here, I need to clarify, is specific to the ancient religious mindset. And actually, that's kind of redundant to say ancient religious mindset, because the ancient world was intrinsically religious. It's almost not necessary to say ancient religious. It's just the ancient mindset. Unlike today, where based on the talks we had last night, which were just wonderful, where we talk about the secularization of thought and the elimination of God, the divine was an intrinsic part of ancient living. 100% absolutely imbued every aspect of living. If there were atheists, and there probably were a few atheists, there always are, they certainly did not control education such as they had it, or politics, or government, or religion. Society was intrinsically religious. And so when we're talking about the structure of reality, the concepts of what we're talking about, we're going to be talking about what the ancient people actually believed to be true, not necessarily what we believe to be true. We're trying to understand their concept, their context for life, and so we're going to make sure we approach it from their perspective. And in their perspective, they all over the world, and this is where in the college class I'd give you a lot more depth and examples. We'd probably spend a whole week just on this slide. We'll maybe spend 5 minutes or less on this slide in here. But all of ancient reality believed that the universe, all of creation centered on the earth, was structured in 3 distinct realms. The first one is the heavenly realm, or the upper realm. This is where God lives, or the gods lived, if you're believed in a pantheon of gods. This is representing sky and space and stars and angels, and it's that divine upper realm. And it's easy to think of how ancient people might have arrived at this conclusion, because even now with our modern scientific understanding, we look out into space, and it's awe-inspiring. It's so transcendent to look out into this infinite expanse that even with our modern understanding, it just blows us away. Think of what that experience was like for the ancient person, looking up into something so vast, transparent, yet real, yet unreachable. It intrinsically called to mind the experience of the divine, that there is something greater, more powerful, and transcendent up above us out there. And they believed that was where God or the gods dwelt. On the other hand, they also believed in a lower realm, something underneath the earth. And when we say underneath the earth, it could literally mean 2 inches under the soil down to the core of the planet. Anything underneath where a human lived was part of this underworld. And of course, you think of hell, you think of like the Greek underworld, you think of a place of evil spirits, or where the dead go. Right? We can understand this thought, right? I mean, this isn't foreign to us. And of course, you have humanity that lives in the middle realm, on the surface of the earth. What's really interesting about their thought about the middle realm is they taught that humanity had no place in the lower realm. Of course, who wants to go to hell, right? But that humanity could not enter into the upper realm by virtue of its own power. Humans could not climb a ladder into heaven. They couldn't, or what does Zeppelin say? The stairway to heaven. There was no way for humanity to enter into the upper realm unless brought there by the divine. Humanity is stuck on the surface of the earth. And think about what that means. You're stuck in a purely profane realm. Now, profane, I don't mean in terms of profanity or vulgarity. Profane in the sense of history of religions means an existence entirely devoid of the supernatural. It's just physical people, stones, earth, trees, nothing divine to it, because divinity resides up above, or evil divinity resides down below. Why this is significant is because this speaks to the issue of orientation. In a purely profane existence with no divine, you have no foundation for morality, for values, for truth, for order. And if you were here, who was here last night? Can I see some hands? Looks like the vast majority of people were here last night. Last night, you heard people, great speakers, talk about how we need God for an absolute foundation for truth or morality or value. So I'm not going to go into that again too much, but I do want to reemphasize it to a point. All establishment of truth, all orientation for life and reality requires an external point of reference outside of oneself and greater than oneself. Let me put this into an example that might help you understand. I like to think of people who are lost at sea. I don't like to think about it. That scares the heck out of me, actually. I like being on cruise ships, but I still get a little scared. What happens if they go down? They stress me out a little bit. I'm not a swimmer. I actually can't swim, so water makes me nervous in that regard. And so for me, this actually speaks to me, the idea of what if you're lost at sea? And so picture a person. You can put yourself in this if you want to. Picture a person lost somewhere in the South Pacific. Even though this is a daytime photo, think of it as night with cloud cover. You can't see the moon. You can't see the stars. You have no compass by which you can determine where north is. There are no observable currents. There's no land. There's no light. You don't know where you are. You're just floating in your little life preserver ring thing. How's that for eloquent? How do you figure out where you go? Right? If you're on a modern ship, you have GPS, you have a compass, you have charts, and if the sky wasn't covered, you could navigate by the stars if you have that skill. But in this example, you have nothing. You have no external point of reference by which to guide your life and provide meaning for your journey. You have to have a point of reference to know where to go. If you don't, yes, you can set out in a particular direction, but that might lead to land or it might not. You don't know. And that's what a profane existence is like. You're kind of just floating around, bobbing in the sea with no idea of where to go. And that's actually where our society has come to with relativistic morality and a lack of absolute truth. They talked again about that last night. But what happens is, well, what if you're lost out there? What if we're all lost together? What if there's, 30 of us bobbing around in the ocean together? And 25 of the 30 say, yeah, I'm pretty sure land is that way. And so you all go that way, and guess what? That's no different than just you taking a guess. Odds are you're going to die. The odds of finding land are really slim. Popular opinion doesn't make truth. Popular opinion doesn't tell you the safe place to swim. You need that external higher point of reference in order to figure out where you're going. And for the ancient people, they understood this far better than modern people do. For all of our advancement, we've lost our grasp on what provides meaning and truth as we have secularized life. Because we need God, or the ancient people needed some sort of divine intervention to give them that point of reference that provided true north, a way to orient their life, a way to figure out where to go. For me, there's a particular, I listened to it this morning on the way in, there's a particular song that just captures my imagination. It's a beautiful, haunting song. My poor wife had to listen to it about 3 times in the car this morning. And the song, the protagonist, it's a metaphor. And boy, you would think this person had listened to one of my lectures or something the way it's written, but no, she hasn't. The song, it's in German, but the English translation expresses this so poignantly. It says, somebody out there, give me a sign, a reason, something worth finding. And the metaphor she uses is actually being out at sea, lost on a boat. It's probably why it's my favorite song. It's like, wow, it speaks to what I study. Speaks to the fact that everyone needs a point of orientation. And in a profane existence, meaning just life in that middle realm with nothing from below and nothing from above entering into that middle realm, that's all you have. You have a life without meaning or direction or orientation. And so we get to the concept of the hierophany. I'm going to use one of those fancy religious words. I'm sorry, I don't know another word to use. Okay? Hierophany. I'll put it up on the screen here in a second. A hierophany is when the sacred, typically from the upper realm, manifests into that middle realm of humanity. When an appearance of God, an angel, some supernatural event, and suddenly absolute truth and reality manifests into the human realm and gives people a point of reference for life and meaning. They experience the divine. This concept, the hierophany, there it is on the screen now, is the most fundamental thing you have to understand if you want to understand ancient religious symbolism. This is what lies underneath every symbol in the ancient world, is this concept of the hierophany. Now, of course, they didn't use the word hierophany. There was a Romanian in the 50s by the name of Mircea Eliade who coined the phrase, so we're using a relatively recent term. But this is the concept they had. You have the structure of reality here with the little clipboard I could get out of PowerPoint here. Fancy stuff. And then suddenly something supernatural or seemingly supernatural happens that seems to indicate to people that the divine has interacted with them in the profane realm. Maybe it's an actual appearance of a spiritual being, an angel. Maybe it's a Christophany or a theophany. Maybe it's demonic. Maybe it's a false god. Right? There's all sorts of possible hierophanies that could happen. An actual appearance of a sacred being or something strangely supernatural. Think of Moses when he's up on the mountaintop and he's tending to the flock, and suddenly he encounters a bush that's on fire, but it's not actually being consumed. That is not natural. That is supernatural. That's a divine presence. And of course, and then the voice that comes from the burning bush, right? Definite hierophany, a manifestation of the divine in the profane realm, or sometimes a meteorite. If you actually look at the Kaaba over there where Muslims worship, the cornerstone, they have a big famous black stone that's at the corner of their holiest site. And science tells us that that black stone is probably is the glass created by the impact of a meteorite. And meteorite came down, impacted there, created some funky black glassy stone. What's significant about that is the people there, long before Islam, the pagans living there, saw the streak of light coming down from the sky, from the heavens, impacting in the realm of humanity, and they thought, wow, that's something divine. Of course, we know what it is with science, but we're talking about their ancient concept, their perception of reality. They thought that was something from the heavenly realm reaching down to the earthly realm, and so pretty soon all the different pagan religions began erecting shrines at that location and began worshiping the divine because they thought the divine had manifested in that space. And then later, Islam took it over and made it part of their religious ceremony. So people would perceive hierophanies. It doesn't mean they actually were hierophanies, but it's important that they thought they were. It might be a strange sound. It might be cattle that always acts really different around a particular tree. They say, normally my cows or my sheep act this way, but then they act really funny around this one tree. There must be something supernatural about it. And so they'd perceive all sorts of hierophanic events, all sorts of manifestations of the sacred in their profane realm. And because they were deeply religious, because they really sought after divine influence in their life, they thought that these were some of the most valuable places in the world. This is the foundation of the world's sacred sites. The places that become sacred in the world are places where they thought a gateway had been opened between heaven and earth. In religious science, we call it an axis mundi. It's a Latin word. It's a connection between the three realms in a particular location. Wherever the divine manifested, for example, that burning bush, the ancient mindset may or may not be true, I'm not commenting on it, but the ancient perception of it was that a permanent connection had been opened between the heavens and the earth in that location. Again, we call that an axis mundi. They thought it was more than a one-time temporary break between the realms. They thought that generally a manifestation implied permanence. And so because of that, they began to really value these places of hierophanies, where they thought something supernatural happened, because to them, it became a place where they could commune with, experience, hear from, learn, be influenced by the divine, and orient their life around this divine manifestation. Now, again, I want to be clear. I'm not saying what they thought was true was actually true, but it's just their perspective. And it's what underlies the ancient symbology. We get an example of this from the Bible. I want to point out that this is not an anti-biblical concept. In fact, throughout the entire ancient world, the most explicit example of hierophany and axis mundi comes to us from the book of Genesis. I don't believe there's a better example anywhere in world religions throughout the ancient world. I'm going to read this through fast, and then we're going to break it down verse by verse. It comes from Genesis 28, talking about Jacob. It said, he had a dream in which he saw a stairway resting on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. There above it stood the Lord, and he said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. When Jacob awoke from his sleep, he thought, surely the Lord is in this place, and I was not aware of it. How awesome is this place? This is none other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven. Jacob took the stone he had placed under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on top of it. He called that place Bethel. And then he said, the stone that I have set up as a pillar will be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will give you, God, a tenth. Let's break this down in the specific relevant things to ancient religious symbolism. Jacob saw a stairway resting on the earth, the middle realm of humanity, and reaching up into heaven. You have that connection between the planes, between the upper realm and the profane realm of humanity. It crosses both, and so it's that connection. It's that axis mundi. To carry that further, he saw angels of God ascending and descending on the ladder. For reasons that will become clear a few slides down the road, it's really important to note they are on the ladder. They're not 10 feet off to the side. They're not 30 yards over. The ladder is their point of connection. It's how they are traveling between the realms in this vision. That's just what he saw in the vision, right? That meant that there was an effective path for connection and communication with the divine provided by that ladder, by the axis mundi. And there above it stood the Lord. This is God initiated and God controlled. Jacob did not create this. The angels did not create this. This was God's chosen point of connection at that place and time. That was what he did. And he said, surely the Lord is in this place. He recognized that this connection between realms meant that the presence of God was there in that specific geographic location. Sacred space. Similar to what Moses experienced on Mount Sinai. Put off thy shoes from off thy feet, for the ground upon which thou standest is holy ground. The concept of sacred space. He recognized that here. He says, this is the house of God. Not the temporary visiting place of God, not the one time only. In the ancient mindset, again, this may or may not be true, but in the ancient mindset, it implied permanence, or the chance that the presence of God would manifest there again. He said this is the gate of heaven, again implying that break between the realms, the access point by which heaven and earth communicate, and the divine could use it again. And then he took the stone he had been using as a pillow. Dude needs to learn to make better pillows, by the way. I think he had some sheep with him. He probably could have sheared them and done something a lot more comfortable, but he was using a stone as a pillow, and then he took that stone and he set it up to be vertically oriented, something with its base in the ground and reaching up towards the heavens. It is a permanent marker for him to refer to again in the future, and for generations after him to note in that place that something sacred had happened here. And then he ritually consecrated it with oil. He called it Beth-El, house of God. That's what Bethel means, Beth-El. He called it the house of God. And then most importantly, he said, the stone I set up as a pillar, he's again marking it as God's house. Then what does he say? He says, of all that you give me from this point on in my life, I'm going to give you a tithe back of 10%. What's significant about that is this is the point at which we clearly see that Jacob is now orienting his life on God. God has become the center of his life. No matter where he travels in the world, no matter how much he earns or what he gets, he recognizes that God is the ultimate center. God is that point of reference. God is that most important thing to him, that revelation of absolute truth, and it took place here. So in the Bible, we have the clearest example of hierophany and axis mundi that you can find in world religions. I mean, seriously, you go study them all. There's lots of hierophanies. There's lots of axis mundis. This is the most explicit example, but it's going to get better later on. All right? So now let's move on and talk about specifics. Man, I thought I was moving fast. This is going to be rough to squeeze this in. We'll give it a try. Let's talk about specifics. We're going to go through specific symbolic examples that you have probably heard about or seen or visited throughout the world. We'll go through them quickly because, again, we don't have time for the full class. Stone markers, right? Stone pillars. Everyone's familiar with the concept, right? Maybe it's a stone pillar, maybe it's Stonehenge, maybe it's a stone circle. This is one of the most common ways used throughout the world to mark a sacred site. They were always vertically oriented. Again, implying to the human mind that vertical connection between heaven and earth, or even hell. Connection between all three realms because the base of the stone is planted in the ground. It's a vertical connection between all three. And what's interesting, if you go to a place like Stonehenge, anyone been to a stone circle before? Wow, we've got about 5 people that have visited a stone circle. Stonehenge in particular is interesting. I don't actually care for Stonehenge, but there's something interesting about it in that they have these giant stones. Duh. But what's interesting about them is the stone they used comes from about 20 miles away. If they wanted to create a marker to celebrate the divine, they could have just piled up dirt, right? It would have been a whole lot easier. There's a specific reason they use stone. They wanted permanence, again, because when the divine manifested in a particular area, they thought it implied a permanent break between realms. And so they wanted to be able to mark it for future generations and for future use. But also stone reflects the qualities of the divine: permanence, strength, power, something that is far more absolute than human life or human existence. So stone held very specific existential qualities that made it a perfect religious symbol for representing the divine on earth. And so they used stone. And there's hundreds of stone circles throughout the world. There's hundreds of solo megalithic monuments or menhirs or Jupiter stones or whatever word you use. And it doesn't matter if it's a single standing stone or a circle of stones, the function is the same. They reference the work of the upper realm on earth. And yeah, a lot of you will think, but I've watched, history channel, the Faux History channel, about stone circles, and they tell me they're like for astronomical stuff or for seasons, and yes, they are. What is astral theology? What is astrology? What is celestial orientation? It's referencing the sky realm for direction on earth. Yes, things that were used for astronomy absolutely followed the same pattern of taking orientation from the divine realm and using it to influence things on earth. So even though the specifics might differ, stone circle in South Africa might be a little different from the stone circle up in Ireland, they still reference the same general pattern of taking direction or communication from the upper realm. Right? Besides, this is my favorite stone circle. Again, I'm not a Stonehenge fan, although if you have the opportunity to see it, go see it. This doesn't look like much, but there's a specific aspect to it that I like. This is the village of Avebury over, again, in the UK, maybe an hour or so from Stonehenge. And you can't see much of the stones that are remaining. I don't know if I have a laser pointer or not. Yeah, you can kind of see some stones here and some stones around there. This is the world's largest known henge enclosure. There is no larger one that has ever been discovered in the world. Now, unfortunately, when the Romans came into the area, they broke down a lot of the stones and used them to build houses and roads. So they absolutely pillaged it, and so we have just the remnants up there along the top and through a little bit of the middle. In fact, there were several concentric circles that were built there. And it's even so big that they have a 2-mile-long avenue of stones that stretch out into the distance beyond this circle. Now, in modern times, you can see that to the north of the henge, because you can see the dirt embankment. To the north of the henge, you see that part of the modern village is outside there. But the ancient village, when they've dug down and uncovered it, was entirely contained within that stone circle. They built and kept their dwelling place, their habitation, their life entirely contained within what they thought was a reference point for divine living. Their very construction, the very way they lived their life and placed the buildings, communicated how essential to them their experience of the divine was in their life. Now, mind you, I'm not saying that it was true. I have a feeling the divine powers they worshipped were false gods. So I'm not saying they were right in their particular approach. But what's interesting is they had a central importance to the impact and influence of the divine in their life. They wanted to build their whole village inside of this sacred site. That's a mindset that our secular culture has lost today. So I like that village. Let's move on to cosmic mountains. Mountains, this should not be a strange symbol to anyone that has read the Old Testament or even parts of the New Testament. Mountains are often a place of divine encounter. Again, Moses, Mount Sinai. How about Jesus on the Mount of Transfiguration? There's all sorts of, the holy mountain of Zion. There's all sorts of things in the scriptures that talk about mountains being a place of divine activity. And the reason why, it's in the ancient mindset, they viewed the peaks of the highest mountains as a potential meeting place where the heaven met the earth, and there's a little bit of overlap and the ability for divine interaction there. Probably the most easily accessible example to us in our minds comes from the Greeks, Mount Olympus, right? That's where Zeus and all these gods lived. They lived on the top of Mount Olympus. They ruled over the earth from Mount Olympus, which is actually a real mountain in the south of Turkey, just north of the Syrian border now. All of the ancient cultures, every single one had places of elevated land where they believed the divine came down and interacted with humanity. It was either a temporary home for the divine, if the divine had their heavenly abode, but if they had an earthly abode, they would live on mountaintops, or they would administer rule of the earth from a mountaintop. And if you were able to journey to the top of a holy mountain by invitation of the divine, it was equivalent to an ascent up into heaven. Right? Now, I live in Enumclaw. Sorry about that. We have a mountain in Enumclaw called Mount Peak. It raises 1,000 feet in elevation over the local plain there. I think there are about 1,000 people a day that get their exercise by going to the top of Mount Peak. I'm pretty sure there isn't divine action up there at the top. Right? Not every hilltop, not every mountain in the ancient view was considered a place of divine activity. They were considered potential places for divine activity, and once they happened, people thought that they would be continuing places of divine activity. It's no accident that Mount Sinai is a place of multiple encounters with God, or that Mount Zion is such an important place among religion, Christianity and Judaism in particular. That there are mountaintops where people can experience the divine. It's just a common thought. The idea of elevated land. It's either, I mix up my verses, it's either Jeremiah 20:22 or 22:20, I don't remember which one, that has a verse that says, that's referring to ancient Israelite practices in worshiping false gods. And it says, on every high hill and under every green tree you have lain down as a harlot, talking about their interaction with false gods. On every high hill. They weren't worshiping in the lowlands. They would specifically go to the highlands to worship because you're closer to the divine, a place of divine presence and divine interaction. A lot of ancient myths, in fact, deal with this, whether you're talking about the fallen watchers of Enoch or Genesis 6, where fallen angelic beings came down and did evil things with humans. The temple of Etemenanke over in Mesopotamia is another example of this. Temples, pyramids, Mayan temples, ziggurats back in the Middle East were all human imitations of mountains. Humans would build these imitation mountains that were places for the divine to interact with humanity. That's what temples are, sacred space where the divine interacts with humanity. They build imitation mountains. The temple of Etemenanke had a ritual bedchamber at the top of it for divine sexual interaction with humans. Evil stuff. By the way, that same thing was found on the top of Mount Hermon, which is in the border between Israel and Syria, and where Og of Bashan ruled from. Mount Hermon is also where the legend of the fallen watchers takes place. Right? Again, a perverse form of divine human interaction, but there were these thoughts that took place at mountaintops. So high places, something to understand. And I know I'm going through the symbols. We're going to impact it with Christianity here soon. Sacred trees, again, a tree has a vertical orientation. To the human mind, it indicates that it's crossing three realms. Its roots are in the underworld. It passes through the realm of humanity and stretches up toward the sky. So it has that natural human inclination towards that style of thought. But instead of being stone, it's made out of vegetation, and vegetative axis mundi have a different existential quality and religious symbolism than stones do. Stones are permanent, powerful, unchanging, absolute. Vegetative axis mundi are life-giving and are symbols of renewal, which kind of makes sense with trees, right? Because they're living and we'll often get fruit off of them, and they drop seeds and more things grow, and really common. It's why a lot of pagan mythology, including modern paganism, reveres trees and plants so much. I think you saw a clip about that a little bit last night. Okay. The trees were often consecrated because there was a seemingly supernatural event that took place there. Again, the burning bush with Moses, kind of a good example. Maybe there was, in Aboriginal Australia, there was a tribe called the Achilpa, and we're going to talk about them again, I think, on the next slide. And the Achilpa had a sacred tree where they believed their god Bao had ascended to heaven on that tree. He climbed up the branches to the very top and then leapt up and went up into heaven. So they thought axis mundi, right? They thought there's that connection, that ladder between heaven and earth. And so that became a sacred tree to them. Later, that tree was struck by lightning, and it wasn't damaged. And they thought, yeah, this is definitely a sacred tree. Because, I mean, that just doesn't happen, right? Now, with modern science, we can understand that, but to the ancient mindset, they're like, yeah, that's a supernatural tree, it's a sacred tree. It became a point of orientation and reference for them. And they were symbols of divinely given authority. For example, it's no accident that well, let me ask you, where was the Buddha when he achieved his enlightenment? Under a tree, that's right. Where was Deborah in the book of Judges when she pronounced judgment? Under a tree. There are patterns. I'm not saying they're true, but these are the patterns of ancient religion around the world. Trees often held that symbol of divine connection, and if you sat near a sacred or consecrated tree, it was a symbol of divine authority, which takes us into the next example. Of course, tree of life, sacred tree, you think in the Bible, right? So we see it in the Bible. Let's talk about poles, staffs, and scepters. A pole was basically a portable version of the sacred tree. Literally, in East Asian shamanism, they used to carry sacred trees with them in their nomadic journeys and use them in their shamanic rituals for descent and symbolic descent into the underworld and symbolic ascent into heaven. They eventually gave that up and made poles out of their sacred trees, because poles are a lot easier to carry around than whole trees. And they'd make literally a big center tent pole, something similar to a totem pole, and they'd use that for their sacred rituals. Again, they'd set them up in their sacred buildings. They'd use those to imitate that connection between heaven and earth, their connection with the divine. Essentially in the shamanic rituals, they would, specifically when they were trying to deliver someone from evil spirits, ironic, or looking for healing, the shaman would use that axis mundi, that vertical connection. He would pray over the afflicted person. He would then ritually imitate a descent into hell on the axis mundi. He would use the pole to descend to the ground and writhe in agony as he imitated being tortured and plucked and pulled apart by the evil spirits. Then using that axis mundi, he'd climb that pole up to the top, mimicking an ascent to heaven, an acceptance of the sacrifice, and he'd go into all sorts of ecstatic kind of odd rituals and stuff, using that pole from the sacred tree to imitate that connection between hell, earth, and heaven. Now, those poles eventually became a staff, right? Think of the staff, Lord of the Rings. I'm a big Lord of the Rings fan. The staff of the wizards, right? You have Saruman, you have Gandalf with their staff. How about the staff of Moses? Right? This isn't just the property of fantasy. The staff held a very specific symbol. Once again, it's a portable axis mundi. It's a symbol of divine power and connection. When you held that staff in your hand, what you were symbolizing is that whatever power you had was not your power, but divine power. Because that staff, that vertical orientation of life-giving and renewal and connection with the divine, that prophet staff was that axis mundi that indicated that prophet was connected with and authorized by the divine in their duties. Now, of course, that doesn't mean it was true. Lots of false prophets out there. Lots of prophets that were probably getting their power from the underworld and not from heaven, right? But that was what it indicated in the ancient mindset. Again, Moses gives us some of the best examples of this throughout ancient history. Regardless of religion, we get some of our best examples from the Bible. Moses has this staff. It's that vegetative axis mundi, that portable sign of connection with the divine. He's in that duel with Pharaoh's magicians. His brother throws his staff down. The magicians throw their staffs down. They turn into snakes, and it's the staff from God's actual prophets that swallow up the other staffs and turns back into a staff. Symbols of power and connection. I was hanging out at Microsoft in the hallways talking with a guy that used to go to my church there. And I was talking with him, and there was a lady there who's a devout Muslim from Egypt. And I don't remember how it came up, but he was talking about Moses and the Red Sea. And he says, and when Moses stretched his hand out over the Red Sea, and I said, stop right there, Ryan. It wasn't his hand. And then Marwa, the Muslim from Egypt, says, yeah, it wasn't his hand. He held a staff in his hand. The Quran tells us it's so. It had to be a staff. I said, you know what? You're right. There was a staff in his hand. But do you know why? No, I just know the Quran says he had a staff, right? That's what most Christians would probably say. He stretched his staff out over the waters. He stretched the staff out because the power to divide the sea was God's power, not Moses' power. That power is only effective when he's connected with and doing the will of God. If it was, hey, part, it's going to look like Moses is doing it. If it's, I'm holding the staff of connection with God in my hand, then it's clear in the mindsets of the ancient people who were witnessing it, that's who were experiencing it. It wasn't us, it was them. It's clear that that's divine connection and power doing that act, not Moses. Again, he strikes the rock with the staff to get water. When they're battling the Amalekites, look at the symbology here. When they're battling the Amalekites, what does he do? He goes up on a hill. Oh, we got that elevation again. And when he raises, not his hands, but when he raises his staff, that symbol of divine connection toward the heavens, they win the battle. He's up on the hilltop, on the mountaintop, raising that symbol of divine connection to the heavens, and they win. And when he doesn't, when that appeal to divine connection and power drops, they lose. The symbolism throughout Scripture is amazing if you have the background to see it. There's a lot of it going on. All right. Holy cow, we are going to run short on time. I've never tried a 12-week class in an hour before, so this is fun. Cosmogony. I thought hierophany would be the last big word I threw out at you. Oops, sorry, I forgot about this one. Cosmogony, it means creation, basically, or a story of creation, the creation of the universe, how things came into being. And I'd love to spend weeks talking about this. This is my favorite topic in all the world. I could talk about this for days on end, and my poor wife has heard me talk about it for days on end. But bottom line is the moment of creation in the ancient mindset, which is what we're talking about. The ancient mindset, the moment of creation was the example of when God's power was on the greatest display. Whether it was the God of Israel or their false gods they served, they thought that the actual act of creation was the most single powerful thing that God could do, the best example of it, which kind of makes sense. And in their minds, they believed in some extent in a chaotic, overriding evil that was all over the world. And God had to bring order to the chaos in order to establish his will and make human life possible on the earth. Now, we need to be real careful here. The Bible uses a lot of these motifs, and we'll see some of those in a second. But I want to make sure we understand that unlike some ancient religions, the Bible does not teach that there was a pre-existing eternal chaos at war with God throughout eternity. Not true. However, the Bible does use some of the cultural motifs of the chaos and the cosmogony in explaining God's power. Doesn't mean that the chaos was pre-existing and co-eternal with God. It just means the Bible's using some of that symbolism. I want to be clear with that. And they all taught that there was this pre-existing chaos, usually personified by this chaotic sea. In fact, the second verse of the Bible gives this to us. The very second verse in the Bible talks about the waters. Well, if you go back to the original language and look at the word that's used there, it's actually basically a pre-Hebrew word that indicates the chaotic evil seas, the same word used in all of the competing paganite religions in that realm. It talks about this evil, chaotic sea. It's not just water. It ain't some water sitting in your bathtub. This was something purely evil and chaotic and opposed to God's will in the ancient mindset. It was an example of evil versus good, of chaos versus order, of the enemy of God fighting against God, and God's triumph is when he brings order to that chaos. What does that look like? It's the establishment of land among the ocean, which is what happens next in that passage of Genesis, right? God begins to divide the waters, establish some form and order, bring land into it. The Egyptians, in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, they say he placed ma'at, or order, in the place of chaos, referring to the reference of the cosmogony. They call it the primordial mound, the very first piece of land to come up out of the sea, kind of mountain-shaped, go figure, mountain-shaped, coming up out of the sea, holding the waters back. This is God's establishment of order in the place of chaos. I won't go into this any further in that aspect, though I'd love to. But we need to know that this concept of chaos, evil, sea, it's kind of a tough thing to comprehend. You may yourself have some wheels spinning, may not understand it fully because I'm rushing through it. But we know that that concept eventually evolved into other serpentine amorphous creatures. Notice all of the symbology of chaos is with amorphous things, things like snakes and serpents and sea monsters. It went to a sea monster, to a sea serpent. It turned into a hydra, an amphibious sea beast. Guess what? We see that in the Bible. It's called Leviathan. I've heard some people say Leviathan was like a giant sea alligator. Really? Then how come it says in Psalm 74, you broke the heads, plural, of Leviathan? This was the common representation of chaotic evil sea, was this hydra. We probably know it best from Greek mythology or modern computer games, the hydra. That then turned into a dragon. You're all familiar with the dragon in the Bible. Dragons were pictured as very serpentine beasts with wings. Excuse me. And then finally to the serpent. So this idea of the chaotic evil sea that God conquers took several iterations through time, from sea serpent to hydra to dragon to serpent. We see these in the Bible. We have Leviathan with its heads in Psalms. You have the dragon mentioned in Scripture. You have the serpent in the garden. You have Behemoth. You have these giant beasts. We're not entirely sure what they mean. You have Rahab. I'm not talking about Rahab and Jericho. Technically different language and different word from Rahab mentioned in Isaiah, I believe, which is, again, another one of these aquatic monsters that God has to conquer. So God brings order to the chaos. He establishes land among water. And we see this symbolized in a few different ways. When you get to religious symbolism, the number 4 becomes really important. I know in the Bible we see the number 12, we see the number 7, we see the number 40. For some reason in religious thought, around the world, the number 4 representing the 4 cardinal directions is very important. North, south, east, west. All the ancient cultures knew about the cardinal directions long before we had a magnetic north or anything like that, or before we knew about a magnetic north. They represented the 4 cardinal directions. And so anything with the number 4 became very significant in this regard, anything that represented the 4 cardinal directions. So there's a lot of ancient religious symbolism that has that shape to it, because when they were conducting a ritual or a symbol, they wanted to appeal to creation, because that's when the most divine power was present. So if they were making a sacred building, conducting a sacred ritual, they thought by invoking a cosmogonic religious symbol, they were appealing to the divine power present at the time of creation. Just saying that's what they thought, not saying it's true. That's what they thought. So you see the number 4, or you see a circle with the 4 cardinal lines drawn through it. That's another very common variation of a religious symbol indicating the cosmogony. You might have construction with this. You take a look at Native American longhouses, even in this country, or you go to New Guinea and they have men's longhouses that have 4 walls. You think 4 walls, that's not really a big deal, right? Lots of things have 4 walls. Well, they built them specifically in their oral tradition. It tells us they built them with 4 walls to represent the 4 cardinal directions. And they put 1 window only in each wall, again to represent the 4 cardinal directions, and they painted each wall a different color in order to represent the 4 cardinal directions. They were invoking the cosmogony as a blessing on that building. Right? We see it with enclosed sea or chaotic waters like the Molten Sea in Solomon's Temple, giant like 14,000 gallon, well, I almost said hot tub, but that might be sacrilegious. Giant 14,000 gallon tub of water in the temple. And what did that giant containment of water, look, order around the chaos containing the water, what did that sit on? It sat on a pedestal made from 12 oxen, but the oxen, the Bible tells us, were specifically grouped into 4 directions: north, east, west, and south. Again, a cosmogonic symbol. If I had more time, I'd tell you about this. This is my favorite baptismal in the world, and in the Salzburger Dom in Austria. Couldn't believe it when I ran into that. That's actually a Roman ritual water basin from 2 BC. They converted into a baptismal. You'll notice what they put it on. The church itself is not oriented in the cardinal directions, but they made sure their baptismal, this cosmogonic ritual with water, was put on something that indicated the 4 directions. And actually I have pictures of the top of it that I'm not going to go through here. And the very top of that baptismal is etched with all the water stories from Scripture, all the cosmogonic symbolism. So it's a very important thing. Holy cow, I'm not going to make it. I'm going to have to leave you hanging. That's the worst thing possible.
Could you tie in a little bit of this to the Christ part?
That's what we're going to do, because I have to. Because we're running out of time. So we're going to skip over Eden. We're going to skip over some other stuff. There's a book, I guess you can read the book for that. Here's what happens. You have these religious patterns, and I skipped a bunch of stuff. You have these religious patterns that are common throughout the entire world. Regardless if you're in Asia, Africa, South America, North America, Arctic cultures, Middle East, you have these patterns that we've just talked about. All of the patterns speak specifically to what humanity has lost, and that's connection with the divine. It's orientation and meaning for living. When we lost our relationship with God, depending on however each religion taught it took place, it taught that mankind lived in this profane world, it needed divine interaction, and it was so valuable to the ancient people that wherever they saw it, they marked it with a sacred tree, a sacred stone, a sacred building, a ritual, because it was so important to them to have that. They wanted that perfect centered connection. They wanted that fellowship with God. Okay. My wife's giving me, you have 1 minute symbol. I'll take a couple more. So the early Bible stories are not borrowed from other religions. That's the big attack. Other religions say, or uneducated people mostly say, that Christianity was stolen from these other religions. Not at all. The symbols that the whole world uses come from a shared source because we all come from one place. We come from Eden. Eden, the garden of God, up on a mountain with 4 rivers coming out of it. Does that sound like anything significant? What happens in Eden impacts the world is the message of the symbology of Eden, where the sacred tree of life was. That Adam ate from. When he was in relationship with God, he had life, he had orientation, he had purpose, he had meaning. When he descended off of God, he lost all of it. And again, Eden has a ton of cosmogonic symbology indicating that what happens in Eden impacts the whole world. I can't get into that because of time constraints, but it's there. And people lost that. And so the truth of the Bible is that God used these patterns to communicate with us on a deeper level. Dietrich Bonhoeffer likes to talk about symbolic and mythical communication, saying that that's how God communicates with us on a deeply personal, intrinsic, spiritual levels, through symbols and stories. That's why Jesus used parables. It's why we have so much symbolism in Ezekiel and Revelation and all sorts of, kind of freaky things like that. Those images stick with us and talk to us, even though we don't always understand them. And here's the message, that for all the religions that have this, who seek after hierophanies, we know that Jesus, and Jesus alone, is the ultimate hierophany, because he is God incarnate in the human realm. Fully human, fully divine in the human realm. There's no hierophany that's possibly greater than that. Forget the burning bush. Forget Muhammad interacting with the demon that said he was Gabriel. Forget all those things. There's no possible greater hierophany than Jesus the Christ here in human world. That gives us what is the purpose of a hierophany? Orientation, meaning, connection, reference, truth. Jesus is that ultimate hierophany. He exercises cosmogonic authority and power. He's the cornerstone, the Bible says, which I don't have time to get into, but that's a cosmogonic symbol, establishing order among the chaos. It's Jesus who walks on water. It's Jesus who brings calm and order to the chaotic seas with a word. In ancient thought, only the supreme God could conquer the chaotic seas. It couldn't be relegated to a lesser God. It couldn't be relegated to an angel. Only God could conquer the chaotic seas. And yet here's the disciples with Jesus, and Jesus says, yeah, waters calm down, and they just go still. To us, we think, yeah, it's a cool story. To the ancient people that lived back then, they're like, whoa, wait a second, only the supreme God can do this. Another claim of the divinity of Christ that a lot of attacks against Christians miss because they don't understand the ancient context for it. Jesus is the ultimate hierophany. He is the ultimate axis mundi. You remember the story of Jacob's ladder? Right? We read that earlier, that verse, where the angels were using the ladder to connect between heaven and earth. What does Jesus say in John 1:51? He says, you will see heaven open and the angels of God ascending and descending on me, on the Son of Man. He's saying, I'm the ladder that Jacob saw. I'm the connection between heaven and earth. Any communication that happens, I'm that connection. There is one name by which you must be saved, right? No one comes to the Father but through me. Jesus is the axis mundi. All of these religions that are seeking for manifestations and connections with God, the Bible gives the ultimate connection to these people. The Bible communicates the truth that all orientation, all meaning, everything you want from the divine is found in the person of Jesus the Christ, who says that he's that ladder connecting heaven and earth. And his ultimate act is full of religious symbology. Where was he crucified? He was crucified on a hill, right? That was simultaneously a place of death representing the underworld, the place of the skull. So you have all three realms represented in that one place. You have the place of the skull, Golgotha, the hilltop reaching toward the heavens, and of course the earthly realm. What happens there, he's crucified on a vegetative axis mundi, a symbol of life and renewal, because it's made out of wood. That itself is a cosmogonic symbol, those four cardinal directions. Everything about that work, what happens then? He descends into hell, he comes back up into the earthly realm for a while, he ascends into heaven. That connection, everything about the ultimate victory over evil, the ultimate smackdown over false, attacks, over lies, over the demonic realm, everything about that is done in the ultimate fulfillment of all religious patterns. It's the restoration of sacred space because we're indwelt by Jesus, we become a temple of the Holy Spirit, and it's the ultimate symbol of victory over evil. The bottom line is that God is the author of the symbolic patterns. He originated them in the garden before people fell. Eden, mountaintop, four rivers, sacred tree. That was all before Adam fell. God knew that besides words and writings and preachings, that he'd need to reach people on a deep emotional level, with myth, with ritual, with symbol. Also that people would pervert it, because people pervert everything. And God gave these symbols to point to the need for human connection with the divine, and to point that Jesus, God's plan, was the ultimate and only possible fulfillment of the religious patterns. There is nothing else in the history of religion that fulfills all of these patterns. Had to rush through the last half of this. I'm so sorry. Maybe I won't try to tackle so much next time. Let me just say, if you're interested in more, my wife and Randy are going to pass out some quick notes, handouts to take with you to reference in the future. They're laminated so they last. There's a book on this I've put out that's coming out Thanksgiving approximately. If you're interested in the full version that's not rushed, you're welcome to go look that up. It'll be out in about a month. You can reach me with any questions you have. I'm the president of Columbia Evangelical Seminary. My contact information's up there. You can reach out to me on Facebook. But if you do that, then you have to put up with all of my personal stuff I post on Facebook. But I'm happy to answer any questions. I'll answer whatever we have now, but I think classes are getting out. So you can also reach out to me at email there and have information there. Yep. Yeah, it's definitely a symbol. I have no stinking idea what it means. Now, I've watched the History Channel, and they tell me that's UFOs. I'm not the guy with the freaky hair, you know. Yeah, I'm not sure I buy that. I don't know what that means.
We have people that declare that Jesus is appeared to them here on earth. Is that can we validate that, or is after he has ascended and sat at the right hand of God, for him to come back in any sense of the manner, would that be?
Well, he did it with Paul.
Be adventing?
Well, he did it with Paul. At the very least, we know that when Paul's on the road to Damascus, he encounters the risen Christ. So at the very least, we have an authentic Christophany, an appearance of Christ in the human realm. We have authentic Christophany taking place at the very least on the road to Damascus. Now, I can't validate any other circumstance. It's possible, because we see from the Bible that it did happen. I suspect most of the time I hear it, it's probably not true, but it could be. I don't know. That depends on the individual circumstance, but there is biblical precedent for Jesus coming back and appearing to Paul on the road to Damascus, post-ascension into heaven. And I'm going to get thrown off the stage here, so
If you have more questions, you can ask him later.